May 19th, 2026. These are the most important stories since yesterday. In governance, a federal jury took under 2 hours to reject Elon Musk's $150 billion lawsuit against OpenAI and Sam Altman, finding that Musk had waited too long to file under the statute of limitations. In AI, Pope Leo will release the Catholic Church's first encyclical on artificial intelligence on May 25th, with Anthropic co-founder Christopher Olah presenting alongside the pontiff at the Vatican. In medicine, SandboxAQ has embedded its physics-based drug discovery models directly into Claude, letting researchers run molecular simulations through a conversational interface without any specialized computing infrastructure. In energy, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission approved 4 advanced nuclear reactors at the Dow chemical plant in Texas under a streamlined environmental review, the first time in the agency's 52-year history that it has done so. In infrastructure, Pennsylvania released a first-of-its-kind model grid tariff recommending that large electricity customers, including data centers, pay up front for any infrastructure built solely because of their connection request. In tech, Anthropic acquired Stainless, the developer tools startup that OpenAI, Google, and Cloudflare relied on to maintain their API libraries, and they will shut down all of Stainless's hosted products. Deeper dives on all of this are in today's Century Report, and many are discussed further in today's podcast. Links to both are in the description. Or if you're already here on the podcast, let's get into it now. The Musk versus Altman trial closed yesterday. A 9-member federal jury in Oakland deliberated for under 2 hours. They rejected Elon Musk's $150 billion suit against OpenAI and Sam Altman on a procedural deadline. The statute of limitations had run on his claims. Judge Yvonne Gonzalez-Rogers dismissed the case. Musk's lawyers says they will appeal. Microsoft, also named in the suit, welcomed the result. Now, if you have been told back in February that a foundational lawsuit about whether the world's most commercially significant AI lab had honored its founding charter would close in under 2 hours on a clock rather than on the merits, then you would have asked whether the merits had been heard at all. 3 weeks of testimony say that they were, though. Murati, under oath on May 7th, described Altman misrepresenting legal clearance to bypass OpenAI's deployment safety board. Greg Brockman on the 2017 Hillsborough meeting where Musk demanded control. Altman himself confronted in cross-examination with opposing counsel's prolific liar framing on May 14th. The jury never reached those substantive questions, though. They found simply that Musk had asked the question too late. The read on what just happened here then. The legal architecture for challenging founding mission departures at AI labs now has a calibrated answer at the deadline level. Claims must be filed quickly, before the commercial transformation that prompts them compounds into something that the courts treat as settled. A complaint that arrives after the IPO talks have begun has, in this framework, arrived after the fact. The clock now runs faster than the transformation that it would discipline. And that sounds like a defeat for accountability. The substantive layer underneath it, though, is different. 3 weeks of sworn testimony are now in the federal record. Whatever the Ninth Circuit does with the appeal, whatever the antitrust claims still pending produce, the next person drafting a founding commitment at an AI lab does so knowing the discovery process can put the CEO on the stand under cross-examination on whether the original promise actually survived. The drafters who care will write tighter charters. The drafters who do not now know that there is a deadline that they can outrun. Both of those effects are real. Now, if you've watched this case and wondered whether the legal system could meaningfully constrain how AI labs evolve from their founding promises, what just got resolved is that the statute of limitations is a real constraint. A founding commitment architecture needs to anticipate it. The next charter is being drafted right now by people who know that transcript exists. Now, a deeper look at this is in today's Century Report. All right, shifting away here. Different institution, different scale of time, same week. The Vatican announced that Pope Leo will release his first encyclical on May 25th. It is called the Magnifica Humanitas, Magnificent Humanity, the first papal encyclical on artificial intelligence. The document was signed on May 15th, exactly 135 years after Pope Leo XIII signed Rerum Novarum, the Industrial Revolution-era text that established Catholic teaching on workers' rights and the moral architecture of industrial life. The dating is deliberate. The pontiff is saying in the loudest signal the Church knows how to send, that he reads this moment as comparable in scope. The presentation breaks with tradition. Encyclicals normally get introduced by cardinals at a Vatican press event, but Leo himself plans to attend, and on the launch stage alongside him will be Christopher Olah, Anthropic's co-founder, one of the principal architects of mechanistic interpretability research, the field working to make the internals of AI models legible to humans, alongside the theologian Anna Rollins and the ethicist Léocodie Luchambeau. Notice the geometry of that. The Catholic Church is bringing a frontier AI researcher onto the launch stage of its first moral teaching on the technology, composing the framing with the people building it. The encyclical is expected to call for a prohibition of lethal autonomous weapons, to address labor displacement as a question of human dignity, to argue for keeping the human person at the center of the technology. It speaks to 1.4 billion Catholics. It speaks past them as well into the wider intellectual tradition that the Church helps to shape. So what this signals, when an era is recognized as different in kind from what came before, institutions of the prior era stop addressing it from the outside. Leo XIII's 1891 encyclical did not stop the Industrial Revolution. What it did, though, was give Catholic workers, employers, theologians, and policymakers a shared language for naming what was happening and what dignity required inside it. Magnifica Humanitas is being built to do the same work for this transition. Olah's placement on the stage suggests that interpretability research, the work of making AI internals readable to humans, is being treated as a participant in the moral framework, not a subject of it. So if you're someone for whom the question, is anyone with real weight thinking about what this technology does to human dignity, has felt unanswered, May 25th is when 1.4 billion people receive a document specifically attempting to answer it, with the researcher working on making AI internals legible standing next to the pontiff while it's released. All right, shifting away again here. 2 regulatory actions this week on different timescales from different agencies, both resetting a default that has held for decades. The Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission released a model tariff framework last week. It applies to large load customers, anything over 50 megawatts individually, 100 megawatts in aggregate. Translation: data centers and big new manufacturing. The central provision here, utilities should charge these customers upfront for any grid infrastructure that would not have been needed but for their connection to the system. Cost causation internalized to the customer who triggered the cost. Now that sounds like an accounting nuance, but it's actually a structural inversion. The default assumption for decades has been that the grid expansion costs get socialized across the ratepayer base because the existing customers were the default beneficiaries of any new infrastructure. The new default in Pennsylvania, though, is that the customer triggering the expansion absorbs it upfront through what is called contributions in aid of construction. Pennsylvania may be the first state to require this for data center-driven expansion. Now, on the same week, a different agency, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, completed its environmental review of X-Energy's 4-reactor project at Dow's Seadrift chemical complex on the Texas Gulf Coast and issued a finding of no significant impact. In 52 years of regulating commercial nuclear power, the NRC has never before cleared a project through an environmental assessment instead of the heavier environmental impact statement. The XC100 design is a high-temperature, gas-cooled reactor, a class of technology that the United States essentially abandoned in 1989 when Colorado's Fort St. Vrain plant retired. What both moves here share: institutions of the prior era reaching for proportionality, Pennsylvania calibrating who pays for what, the NRC calibrating how much review fits the actual footprint. The growth in electrical load this country is about to absorb has no comparable precedent. EIA modeling now puts the commercial electricity consumption above residential for the first time in 2027, driven primarily by data centers. Data center load alone is projected to consume a quarter of electricity across the 15-state MISO footprint by 2040. The frameworks built for the prior era, socialized cost recovery, multi-year environmental impact, statements designed for 1,000 megawatts light water plants, were never going to scale to that. Pennsylvania extended the template that PPL Electric's rate case settlement had partly established. The NRC built on the bipartisan Advance Act and a 2025 executive order pushing toward proportionality. Both moved during the conditions that demanded them. So if you have money in a pension fund or an insurer at a regional bank, and you almost certainly do somewhere, those institutions are increasingly lending into the AI infrastructure boom. The cost architecture that they are lending against just got rewritten in Pennsylvania, and not for the first time. The customer at the end of the cable now carries the cost of the cable. That changes what gets built, where, and on whose balance sheet. Shifting away again here, Anthropic acquired a small New York startup called Stainless this week. The reported price was over $300 million. Most people have never heard of Stainless, but the frontier AI labs all know it. Stainless did one technical thing very well. It took API specifications, the documents that describe how to talk to a service, and turned them into production-ready SDKs across Python, TypeScript, Kotlin, Go, Java, etc. It kept those SDKs updated automatically as the underlying APIs changed. The work of manually maintaining library compatibility, which used to consume serious engineering time at every API-driven company, was largely solved by Stainless's automation. OpenAI used it, Google used it, Cloudflare, Replicate, Runway, Anthropic itself. Several frontier labs had been building on the same shared substrate without much attention to who owned it. Anthropic announced that it will discontinue all of those Stainless products. Existing customers keep what they already generated though, but new generations go away. The shared layer just disappeared into one of its customers and got switched off for the rest. Now, reading the surface of that, it's simply competitive positioning. Anthropic tightens Claude's developer surface, owns the tooling that agent integrations will be built on. A rival's dependency vanishes, and that reading's correct. But the reading underneath is even more interesting. The capability that Stainless provided, generating well-formed SDKs from API specifications, is exactly the kind of structured, type-aware code work frontier models are getting better at by the month. The same model capability that makes agentic systems demand well-formed SDKs is the capability that makes producing them model doable. The window in which proprietary SDK tooling functions as a moat closes faster than a $300 million acquisition compounds its return. The replacement is already being drafted. The next SDK generator gets built open source, with governance designed explicitly to prevent single buyer capture, because the lesson of the switch-off is now in the air at every infrastructure layer the field still depends on. The capability is reproducible. What just shifted is the independence of the layer beneath the capability, and the lesson that shared substrates without governance designed against this exact move can vanish overnight. So if you've ever used a piece of free shared infrastructure, an open source library, a public API, a community tool that let you build faster than you could have on your own, then what just happened to Stainless is the case study for why the next generation of those tools will be built with governance the buyer cannot switch off. The cost of building it that way just dropped below the cost of being switched off. Let's bring it to a close today. What today says across institutions that have nothing obvious in common. The prior era's frameworks are not freezing, they are calibrating. A court, a church, a state regulator, a federal regulator, an AI lab, each one made a choice this week about what the prior era keeps, what it revises, and what it accelerates. None of those choices is final. Some of them lean against accountability, some lean toward it. What they have in common is that each institution moved during the conditions that demanded it move, instead of standing still and waiting for the conditions to come back around. Those conditions are not coming back around. If you spent the last 2 years wondering whether the systems that surround you, courts, churches, utility commissions, the developer tools your software depends on, could keep pace with the era arriving, I know I certainly have, which is why I do the Century Report, then today is one of the weeks where the answer was they can, and they are choosing as they go. Now, directions vary, speeds vary, but none of them are frozen. The scaffolding of the new era is being built right inside the institutions you already know, by people working with what they have, on the clock that the capability set. We'll see you tomorrow.